Salam sejahtera, anda bersama Senala Huda dan Dialog Anak Muda kali ini cukup istimewa. Kalau sebelum ini kami bawakan anak muda dari seluruh Malaysia, kali ini kami nak ke luar negara untuk bawakan diskusi bersama dengan anak muda dari luar negara di peringkat ASEAN khususnya. Dan kalau kita lihat dalam kalangan anak muda sama ada di Malaysia ataupun di luar Malaysia, lebih ramai anak muda sekarang ini semakin bimbang dan semakin kuat menyuarakan isu-isu alam sekitar, isu perubahan iklim. Kalau kita lihat antara contoh yang cukup ikonik, Greta Thunberg cukup lantang menyuarakan tentang isu-isu alam sekitar dan mampu menggerakkan satu gerakan ataupun movement di peringkat dunia, peringkat global untuk menyatakan rasa tidak puas hati terhadap peranan menangani isu-isu alam sekitar dan isu krisis iklim. Jadi itu fokus kami untuk jam ini bersama dengan beberapa anak muda dari Malaysia dan juga dari luar Malaysia, rakan-rakan dari peringkat ASEAN untuk kongsikan pandangan mereka mengenai dengan isu ini, apa peranan yang boleh dimainkan anak muda, bagaimana untuk memperkasakan anak muda lagi untuk menyuarakan isu-isu alam sekitar dan untuk mengetengahkan pembangunan lestari dan pembangunan mampan ataupun sustainable development. Jadi, saya ingin memperkenalkan tetamu kita untuk jam ini dan izinkan saya untuk teruskan dalam bahasa Inggeris. Joining me today on Dialog Anak Muda, firstly we have Arvin Apasami, representing Malaysia from the ASEAN Regional Coordinator. Next up, we have Sanjaya Mulia, founder of ASEAN Youth Organisation, or may I call you J. We also have Ibnur Rashad, Chief Innovation Officer of Guild Asia, and Yalin Temrat from the School of Development Studies of Thammasat University. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today on Dialog Anak Muda to talk about, obviously, an issue very, very central to youth issues on a global level. We want to talk about empowering youth in sustainable development. And when we talk about sustainable development, this is not just among the youth, but when we're talking about the perspectives among the general public, among the masses. When we're talking about development, we often conjure up images or ideas of skyscrapers, of modern development, and we're not really thinking about greenery. So perhaps I want to start off with Arvin. I mean, why do you as a young person care about sustainable development, and what do you visualize when we're talking about development?
Hi Naila, thank you for the great question. Actually, when we talk about sustainable development, everybody is thinking about some jargon word, isn't it? Everyone gets scared of the word and what really means about sustainable development. Actually, for me, as a Malaysian, you see, I think that SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, is just a way of life, you see. As a youngster, if you come back to Malaysia scenario, the voters after 18 years old, you see, it's about 6.9 million in Malaysia, whereas the youngsters, we're going to shape the country and as well as ASEAN, as well as the world. So I believe that when we focus much on a sustainable development goal, especially on the sustainable issues, I believe that as the youngsters, we should be the frontliner to shape. I believe that we are the architect of the country, architect of the ASEAN, architect of the world, where we're going to design our future. So while we focus much on development, but we fail to focus much on way of life. So I believe as a youngsters, young leaders, we must come front to sustain the world. Yeah.
I do want to hear from Yalin as well. You are a student at the School of Development Studies at Thammasat University, so I'm sure you have a lot of interesting ideas when we're talking about development. But when we talk about sustainable development specifically, I mean, as a young person, what does this mean to you?
For me, when we are talking about sustainable, I think there is just something that, when we realize what are we doing as a, teenage nowadays. And, like these days, the social become a trend. And I think trend is very easy to become right now. I think maybe sometime when we have a representative from each country in ASEAN youth, we might make some trend together and, as a representative from each country. So it can be a trend in all ASEAN country as well. And I think there is no one left behind. We heard this word so many times since then, but there is still so many were left, like for in Thailand. So we have National Children and Youth Assembly to let the representative from each from all around Thailand to have that assembly together and listen to that problem and how the government can help on this point. And I think this is really good that because Thailand have this, and I'm not pretty sure that other country in ASEAN have this or not. But if we have together, I think we should have more assembly as an ASEAN, and we talk about this together as a development study student. I think we can look from another country in our ASEAN that you might have a role model for us that we can use and develop in our, my country as well. Yes.
Sanjaya, as the founder of ASEAN Youth Organization, I mean, what are your thoughts on sustainable development? I mean, some people are saying these are big jargons, not necessarily, but when we're talking about, environmental issues, there's a lot of jargons being thrown around, and it's hard to sort of visualize among the general public what this actually means and how this can become reality. How can we actualize these things? So what does this mean to you, and is it important to you?
Yeah, this is definitely anyway. So I really agree with Arvind before. So actually, sustainable development goals is actually a way of life. I can say that everyone's have the obligations to implement all of these SDGs in their life. Because if we are looking back at 1987 or something like that, based on the Brundtland Commission, I think the Sustainable Development Goals itself is actually where one generations can meet their needs without compromising the other generation needs. So I can say that we are all here is actually kind of stay for a while in this world. So we have to taking care of whatever we have right now. And we have to think about our future as well, our granddaughter, grandsons, etc. in the future. So they can also feel, they can also have the same experience everything the same with whatever we have right now. So I think this is very important for us in these generations to work together in order to implement all of the sustainable development goals, especially through the environment movement, etc.
Ibnur, what are your thoughts on this when we're talking about championing environmental issues? Some people perhaps have this perspective that, oh, I don't need to care about this. I need to care about, bread and butter issues. I need to think about the food that I'm putting on my table, the roof over my head, more economic, financial issues. That's perhaps to most people the most pressing matter. But perhaps some people don't realize that these two go hand in hand together. In order to achieve economic development, now we also need to think about sustainable development. What are your thoughts on this? Because you are, from Guild Asia, I believe, is in a special position to talk about this from not just an economic or environmental point of view, but also from an innovative and economic standpoint as well.
Thanks so much, Naila. What resonates with me a lot is that idea that we can no longer ignore the environment, right? And I think in a lot of literature with regards to sustainability, it always speaks about the idea of trying to balance the economic progress of a country, of a nation, of a community with the people, right? The society, there's the social behaviors, the social progress, and then there's the idea of the environment. The mistake that most of us do is that the environment is put at the last priority. And I think we see this very, very distinctly when the pandemic happened, right? The highest priority is about life, right? But then later on, we discovered that, you know what, we have been generating so much facial masks, and these masks end up in nature, right? And interestingly, suffocating the animals, right? Then that leads to a different set of problems. The other perspective is that there is this idea that, okay, if we focus only on our economic needs, right, our daily needs, right, then we can put the environment at a later priority. We can still survive. If I were to say that 20 years ago, I would say, okay, maybe, right? But now, right, the strange thing is that climate change, we can no longer ignore the disasters and the weather, freak weathers that's happening. Right. So recently, if you look at TikTok, at Facebook, we see the storms in Saudi Arabia, for example. And then just a few weeks ago was like floods in China. unprecedented. If you push on a few months back, it's floods in Pakistan. And all of these locations are where most of the world countries are getting their food. And I think this is something that we fail to realize that, yes, today we may cover that bread and butter issue. Wait for another 3 more months or 6 more months, which is a harvesting cycle. The prices will go up drastically. And then we realize, oh no, why didn't we do that? But it's already too late, right? And I think this is something that we need to pay a bit more close attention to. That if we don't care of the environment today, the cycle is getting shorter. We will feel the effects within our lifetime. If I were to say this like 20, 30 years ago, yeah, maybe you can wait, right? For maybe 30 days, then maybe our children or grandchildren will suffer. Not the case for today, right? I think this is something that we have to realize that the science is already showing as in SCIENCE, the science is already showing the signs, right? SIGNS, in front of our eyes, is whether we are awake or not to respond.
Yeah, it's true. As you said, we can no longer ignore these issues. I mean, the effects are already being felt, not in just the future in our lifetime, but some of these effects are already being felt today. The heat wave, I'm sure that's being felt in all our countries in the past few months. I mean, that's a sure telltale sign of climate change and global warming. But when we're talking about sustainable development, this goes beyond the environment. We're also talking about economic and social challenges being faced by young people, especially in Southeast Asia. But when we're talking about these issues, I mean, we look at ASEAN, we look at the United Nations and all these sorts of organizations. They're great platforms, and we often see a lot of young people on the front lines championing and talking about these issues. I want to hear, Sanjaya, your point of view on this. Do you feel like young people often have to carry the burden of championing and voicing out on these issues? And where are the grown-ups? Where are the adults on this? Or is it just us who care about this? And why is it important that young people should go forward? And why are they in this special and important position to be able to talk about these issues and fight for them?
Okay, thank you, Naila. So I think when it comes to solving a problem, I think this kind of problem cannot be solved by one particular actors. We need multi actors for to solve all of these things. When the young people actually they have a lot of energy, their initiative, their innovations, where sometimes they do not or lack of support from the previous generation. This is also another problem faced by young people, right? So when we also being asked like where the seniors or the previous generations can help, is actually they can help in any ways. They can also help us with the maybe financing the programs or the projects, and then maybe they can also provide some assistance to connect to stakeholders, etc. Because sometimes when we are talking to young people, they probably have lack of experience in connecting the people. They probably have lesser networks in reality, because sometimes they just like very energetic to do something. They have this energy, but sometimes when we're talking about the financing or they talk about the funding, there's no funding available for that. So I think this is I think not only youth, not only organizations actually facing this problem, not only from Indonesia, but I think this is around the world. They have these ideas, but they cannot implement these ideas. They have these innovations they cannot do again because of what? Because it's the bottleneck is actually regarding to the funding or maybe some resources they have. It's like limitations for that. So I think the previous generations, they have responsibility to support this initiative. I'm sure that IPNU also, running these organizations also need some support as well. Well, some of the governments, they actually supported the initiative, but some of our governments, maybe, in some particular countries, they cannot support this initiative. So I think, but when we're talking about the general issue, the general problems, when it comes happening in one country, it also happening in another country. It will impact it another country as well. So I think we have to work together, no matter what generations you are, to tackle the issue.
I like what you said about working together, not just across generations, but across borders as well. I mean, that's the essence of today's show, right? When we're connecting among young people in this show, it signals the need for us to work together because obviously when we're talking about, these challenges, these issues of climate change, issues of economic and social challenges, now, in a globalized world, we cannot afford to work in silos. We need to work together. So, we want to talk about the ASEAN framework. Perhaps, Arvin, you have some thoughts on this. There are, as I mentioned, a lot of frameworks, a lot of platforms to work on. There's ASEAN, there's United Nations, there's, a lot of other examples out there. But ASEAN itself, why do you think that this can be perhaps a potentially great collaborative framework for young people to work across borders in Southeast Asia in facing these challenges, Arvin?
Hi, Naila. Actually, it's a good question. Yeah, actually, ASEAN, we already have a good structure. For example, we talk about ASEAN Youth Development Index, for example, where they focus on education, they focus on employment, they focus on creating the ASEAN awareness, identity and values, they focus on participation, they focus on well-being and healthcare. But the question, Naila, we already have the good structure, but how about the implementation? That's the big question mark for me, you see, because we already have a good structure, but I strongly believe that we need to transfer the autonomy to the young people, you see, to run the show. Why? Because nowadays, as I mentioned just now, young people are very, very dynamically forced. They can bring the change. And as just now mentioned by Mulia, you see, of course, we have to bind together with the older generation and us. But then what I mean is we have to work borderless through the structure which is already exists. But the matter is about implementation. We should go to bottom-up approach. We have what we call as a youth council every country under ASEAN countries. We can work together. We can implement a lot of things through the partnership, I believe. Yeah.
When you're talking about implementation, surely, I mean, perhaps we're not well aware of some of the challenges being faced in reality. Perhaps, Sanjaya, you can shed some light on this. You are, after all, founder of ASEAN Youth Organization. So, I mean, there's a lot of hope and faith in ASEAN being, this framework that young people in Southeast Asia can work together in facing and in championing these issues. But, I mean, what are perhaps some challenges that you find young people could face in wanting to work within the ASEAN framework? Is it good enough? Is it, enough space for everyone to work in, or perhaps there's much more that's needed?
Thank you, Naila. I think I've already mentioned this one earlier before. Young people, they are very energetic and they have a lot of innovations. But again, sometimes when we want to do or to implement the program, sometimes the resources is actually not enough to complete this task. I can say that we're lucky to be part of the Youth Development Index as well in ASEAN. So we in ASEAN Youth Organizations, we're also implementing some programs that included in the YDI, the ASEAN Work Plan on Youth as well. So, but how about the other initiative out there? Because there are so many young people with organizations. I don't want to say this is a big initiative or smaller initiative. They're all the same. They are trying to fix the problem, but they cannot get the support. Like for us, for example, ASEAN Youth Organization, or maybe some other big institutions, they can get the support from the government. They can get support funding from the stakeholders. But how about the smaller one? They even cannot survive for, some to provide or to create some activities. So this kind of organizations, I think, need some support from others stakeholders in order for them to implement and tackle the issue, because they are very important. Their voice is very important for the sustainability.
When we're talking about the lack of support or resources, I'm sure this is something that is common, or that's being faced in, I can say, perhaps in all of the countries when we're talking about ASEAN. Ibnur, when we're talking about lack of resources and the need for support when young people are out there on the front lines wanting to champion these issues, but there's still not enough support to want to go bigger. Perhaps you can share some of your experience at Guild Asia in combining innovation, combining creativity, but at the same time, still working on social justice, still working on environmental concerns. I mean, how is it that you find that balance?
And so it's very, very true, especially for sustainability innovation, because it's hardware and physical usually, right? For example, ours is this bamboo speaker, right? This is a physical thing. And when you start to build and fabricate physical things, as what Mulia rightly pointed out, you need resources, right? The financing to get the machinery, to get the tools, right? To get the supply chain, right? And I think this is something that sustainability sector is quite unique compared to the digital sector, right? Digital sector, I can easily, get a software a plugin, right, and then do a subscription. And the subscriptions these days are quite affordable, right? But when it comes to physical sustainability work, it requires a mobilization of financial resources, manpower, talent. How Guild kind of overcome some of it. Not that we are very successful yet, because we still face limitations, because we are still a small, in a way, enterprise. We are very, very blessed with partnerships across ASEAN. And why I say that? The bamboo speaker itself, the production is done together with Indonesia, right? And the reason is this, because in Singapore, we have a limit, we don't have much physical spaces that are cheap in terms of our rental, because the rental rates, for those who know, Singapore can be very high, right? And there was a time when the orders start to pick up. Myself and my team member, we were struggling to build and craft the IBAM speakers. And that's when one of my uncle, right, shared with me that, you know what, why not you expand your horizon beyond Singapore, right? So when there is a limitation in your own country, why not look around, right? And we came across a bamboo community in Bandung, right, in Indonesia. And that's when I went down, spent time with the villagers, meet some of the craftsmen, train them up, right? Because this is a new invention. It's not angklung, right? So it's something new that we invented. So we train them up, and that provides livelihood for them. But it also provides us with an avenue that, hey, you know what? This invention has a potential to be scaled up, right? And that's how we managed to grow our base beyond Singapore. And then also because of internet, there's crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, right? So we latched upon some of the crowdfunding platforms. I mean, we were quite lucky at that point of time. People are willing to support using PayPal, Stripe, whatever means that they have to contribute, right, to our initiative. And I think this is something which we learn based on technology that we can leverage, right, using IT. The other one which I learned when I used to live and work in Silicon Valley, which is kind of weird philosophy over there. Right? If you cannot work with, if you have too much resources or too much regulations, why not you work around it?
Yeah.
Right. So this is something that we are facing currently with our floating farming system. Everyone is supportive of it, but when it comes to regulations and experimenting our innovation out in the reservoir, in the lakes, in the ponds, we are being faced by a lot of bureaucracy, right? And then that's when we told ourselves, as innovators, as inventors, can we do a workaround? And we discovered there are people who own private water bodies who are willing to open up, and this is where the private sector comes in, right? Who are willing to let us experiment. And then people from overseas were like, hey, why not you come over to Cambodia, come to Vietnam, come to other parts of ASEAN, right? And prototype. And recently, someone even from Africa was asking, why not you try out your invention, right? Your floating farm system in our country. And I think this is something which wouldn't have happened if we did not leverage the internet. And I think this is something that I encourage youths to kind of explore more. And I totally agree, there are limitations, there are constraints as innovators, as inventors. How do we figure out a way to work around this using what's available? And I think this is something that there's a collective effort. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting to look at that, to cross borders, to collaborate on technology, to collaborate on innovation and creative projects, while at the same time addressing current challenges and issues. I want to hear from Yalin as well. When we're talking about collaborating together collectively across borders, do you think that young people in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN countries, are perhaps not taking enough advantage, not exploring enough of the opportunities just across the border? I mean, when we're looking at Southeast Asia, we're looking at such a diverse group of young people, talents and innovation and potential. Do you think we're not doing enough to unlock that potential to work together across borders, Yalin?
Yeah, not that much. When we are talking about ASEAN, sometimes it looks so far away from ourselves. Yeah, but I think the first thing that we have to unlock is about the idea of the safe space for our children and our youth. I think the children, as you guys have said before, they have so many ideas. They are uh, a lot of power and idea, but the first thing is sometimes there is no safe space for them to explore the idea or to show like what they're gonna do. Like when I was in 2019, I'm not pretty sure, I had chance to have an activity with a children, and in that time Thailand just start to not giving a single use plastic from the convenience store. And I'm asking them that, do you know why did they didn't give you a single use of plastic? And why they don't even know. So I just put them on kind of activity, like to give them a character if there was a marine life and there was cashed by a plastic, how they gonna feel. Yeah, so I think the school is the most important role, the school, university, and I think they kind of important role in this part, like to make a children and the youth feel more safe space to explore the idea and to feel like they are the part of this idea as an ASEAN that we are going to do kind of sustainable development together. I think if we make them feel like yes, they are the part of it, their voice that they have power on their own voice, there is matter and worded. So I think we're gonna get more idea from youth, and we can go far from this as well. And I think if they really understand the perspective of what sustainable development is, so I think it's gonna work a lot and it's gonna affect a lot in a good way, in a positive way.
Yeah, let's hope to see that. And there's a lot more that I want to talk about this, but we are going to take a short break. Kita akan berjalan seketika. Kita akan kembali selepas ini. Jangan ke mana. Bertemu kembali dalam Dialog Anak Muda. Saya masih lagi bersama dengan beberapa anak muda dari serata Asia Tenggara, dari negara-negara ASEAN untuk membincangkan tentang peranan anak muda menyuarakan isu-isu kemampanan, pembangunan lestari ataupun sustainable development. Dan saya ingin teruskan perbincangan dan izinkan saya teruskan dalam bahasa Inggeris. Sejaya, I want to go on with our discussion previously about how some are saying that we're not doing enough to sort of unlock the potential, the plenty of opportunities and potential that we have across borders in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN countries. Do you agree? Do you agree that we're not doing enough and that there's a lot more potential out there that needs to be unlocked among ASEAN youth and talents?
Yeah, agree with that. So I can say that it's we have to do more. It's not enough to do whatever we have done. And I think I just want to highlight in the previous comment from Yalin, because she mentions that they have to be involved, the youth as well, in order to create the programs or activity. I'm totally agree with that, because sometimes when we are seeing some projects done by stakeholders, including the government or maybe private, sometimes they just use the word of youth as the object. They do not put enough trust to young people. They do not involve these young people to be part of it. So I think One thing that I would like to emphasize here, like to everyone who are watching these videos, I think we have to put more trust to young people nowadays. They have a lot of information, they are energetic, have a lot of innovations, but sometimes when we do not have trust to them, they cannot do anything. So that's one thing. And then I think government, private sectors, everyone's have the same role, to taking care of our environment, our planet.
It's interesting that you say that, some people, some parties are using, or not using, but, perhaps trying to ride on youth representation as a form of, what people call as tokenizing, as perhaps performative activism, trying to champion youth issues and youth empowerment, but really not exactly involving them meaningfully in decision making. Perhaps, you can talk a little bit about this. I mean, you went on to do your own thing, right, as a young person, as a youth, but really a lot of decision making that goes on behind doors are, what we see as grown adults, and, we don't really see that youth representation, the voice of young people in important decision making. So what are your thoughts on this? I mean, are we as young people not being taken seriously enough?
Yeah, so there is a climate of, I would say, distrust, like what Sanjaya shared. Because for us, we are young, right? You look at someone young, and then the natural image is that, okay, he does not have enough experience, might not have enough knowledge, and might not have enough connections, right, to enact whatever he wants to say, and therefore we are being labeled as being idealistic, right? And I think this is very dangerous, right? Because the youth would actually be inheriting that earth later, and if they are not given enough, in a way, power, or given enough responsibility to take charge, right? And be involved at the young age, then how can we be even confident and trust them when they grow older, right? And I think this is something that at Guild we have been very, very intentional and mindful when we work with ministries and agencies that is linked to government, and always to remind them that we really need to get the youth involved. And how do we do this? So recently we have been working with the Singapore Science Centre to craft a sustainability champion bootcamp. So basically, as inventors, so because for Guild we are an invention studio, so we get our inventors and our builders and our makers and our farmers, our gardeners, right, people in the sustainability scene. We go to Science Centre. You get all the students, right, the young scientists, and we will provide that safe space, that brave space for them to experiment, right? So if any adults say that this is impossible, right, this is a stupid idea, because as inventors, we know what it is like, right, to go through that, right? And we will say that, you know what, that's a brilliant idea, right? Why not we try this out? What if we make certain changes that and experiment this, prototype this, and then if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, right, it's part of experiment, right? You fail, you do it better, you do it again, right? And I think this is something that we have been very intentional. And I think most recently there was an incident, and this is with regards to youth mental wellness. So there is an increased movement here in Singapore to look at mental wellness amongst the youth, right? So because we also observe that as after COVID, people are more stressed. Yes, some of them unfortunately commit suicide, right? Some go into depression mode, and end up not performing in school, and sometimes even become more disruptive at home, right? Not coming back to home, and then they end up taking drugs and end up in different as delinquents, and maybe even in prison, right? I think it's a waste. I would say it's a waste, right? Because these are youthful energy, right? That is now being stuck inside the prisons, inside the boys' home or the girls' home, right? I think this is something that, and a recent incident that happened was that we were in a discussion, and most were adults, most were seniors, and there were only 3 or 4 of us inside that room. And the discussion was about youth mental wellness, and they want to come up with something called the common agenda. And we were looking at this common agenda, and then it is about youth mental wellness. And then we thought to ourselves, where is the word youth in it? Like there's this whole common agenda that the whole ecosystem, right? Private sector, public sector, and government. And then we are looking like, hey, wait a minute, where's the word youth, right? I know you're concerned about youth mental
Yeah.
wellness, but where's the word youth, right? And I think that's when we remind them. I think it's very important, and I think we are very grateful that at least someone in the leadership recognized that there is a need, right? That youth be a part of that conversation, and that's when one of the youth lady, right? She put out her hand and said that, you know what, maybe in this youth mental wellness space, maybe it's not so much about the doctors and the mental health practitioners giving service to the young. Why not we empower the youth to take charge of their own mental wellness, right? And be peer leaders to each other. Then that's when the conversation changed. And thankfully today, just today, right, we launched for a call for other youth, right, who have ideas about youth mental wellness to come forward, right? And this is where we work at Guild, because Guild, the first GU is actually ground up, right? We really want more ground up movements in not just in Singapore, hopefully also throughout ASEAN.
That's an interesting experience, and I think while you were talking, everyone else in the chat were sort of nodding their heads, like, yes, you know what, I've experienced that. I think we've all experienced that, yeah, right? As youths not being taken seriously enough, and when there's events, when there's conferences and whatnot, trying to sort of champion youth issues and youth empowerment, but perhaps sort of forgetting that. And it's important to remind them, as you said, Ibnur. Maybe Arvin, you can share your thoughts on this, because you're also experienced in working with government, and perhaps you can share some of your experiences in, what is it that young people have to offer in terms of talking about these, national and international issues, when we're talking about authorities, either, government or private, not taking young people seriously enough when we're talking about decision making. What is it that we have to offer, and why is it that we must be taken seriously in these matters, Arvin?
I think, Naila, actually, just now you talk about, I think, Greta Thunberg, is it? So I think she's the greatest inspiration and greatest exemplary young leader for all of us. You know why? When we study about the young girl, if you see that earlier, when she started this climate change protest in front of the Swedish Parliament, she's the only person. I mean, she fought alone. She fought alone for the day one. It means the first week of Friday. You see, because her team was Friday for Freedom. You see, so Friday for Future. But then later on, if you notice that when she started this good cause, and day by day, week by week, month by month, she got the attention from the leaders around the world. You see, you know why? Because she created the demand. So I believe that, of course, you see, for example, in ASEAN, we are just about a 30% of the population in ASEAN, for example. So for sure, the voice, the demand is very low comparably to adult people. But I believe that in Malaysia, for example, we have Malaysia Youth Council, for example. We're working very closely with the Youth and Sports Ministry of Malaysia. And I believe that in Malaysia's scenario, the voice of youth has been heard. That's the reason if you see that, as I mentioned earlier of this segment, where we see the youth at the age of 18 is allowed to vote. You see, so we are moving forward. You see, I'm in a very positive way that I'm seeing that we are moving forward. The voice has been heard now, but the question is how far and how consistent it is. That's the reason why I look forward into the decentralization of the power. It means if you see in ASEAN level, in ASEAN chapter, we see there's a lot of initiative brought by high-level committee, the leaders of the countries around the ASEAN. But the question is, when you guys going to empower the youths to run, to move forward, to put the show at the ground? So this is the questions that always occurred in my mind. Yeah.
Thanks, Arvin, for sharing. A while ago, when Ibno was sharing about his experience, I noticed that both you, Arvin, and Yalin, you were also nodding throughout the whole time, sort of agreeing that, yes, I feel like you've also experienced this, not being taken seriously enough, when people are trying to ride on youth empowerment, that it's just not meaningful. Maybe you have some thoughts on this, you have an experience to share?
As I say that for that, the internet had influenced us a lot. I would talk about, I'm not pretty sure like where they're from, but I think from Southeast Asia's Pandavara group, that they're trying to show how that they, they're not cleaning, but reduce like the place where is, a lot of trash. And I think is impact all around the world, like people seeing like a group of teenage are doing this kind of thing. I think it kind of influence or teenage that say yes, we should help cleaning, and it's just remind us when we're gonna put trash away, like we don't care before, but now we try to separate the trash like this. We could reduce in the future or reuse whatever it is. Yes, I think yeah, but we still need a lot more attention and support from the state and government as a policy as well. Yeah.
Ibnur, going back to what you said about this, why do you think that young people should be taken seriously? I mean, you said, you phrased this as being sort of dangerous, right? If this trend goes on, that we're not being taken seriously, that if our voice gets left behind in decision making and these, sort of national and international issues, it can be sort of dangerous. In your view, what is it that young people have to offer in these matters?
There are two perspectives to this, right? So one perspective is that the danger is that if we are not taken seriously and not get involved in the decision making, then what happened that some of the youth may say that, you know what, I will rebel against this, right? And therefore this would create another counter movement that can actually undermine the whole collective unity, right? And then you have fragmentation, and then in certain cases it might be radicalization, right? Because they feel that they are not heard, right? And if they feel that they are not heard, then therefore they will actually stay away and distance away from society, right? And then that is not what we want, right? When actually we really need these energies, their talents in, right, the community, right? So that's number one. And number two, you were sharing about like how can we better harness the youth energy, right? And their ideas. There are many ways of engagement, right? I know now people are using social media, right? There's this movement in Indonesia, right? I recent Jaya was here, so there's this movement in Indonesia that I see on TikTok and Facebook where they go into like dirty rivers, dirty drains, and clean up, right? And when they clean up, right, it becomes very viral, right? And then people see this that, you know what, cleaning up litter is not dirty. It's actually something moral. It's something that is honorable, and it's actually quite fun, right? And I think it's something that we need to kind of like reverse, right, the perspective that getting your hands dirty, right, going into the mud, right, doing things like farming, which is not cool, right, is something that is worthy, right, to embark on, and it's only through making it fun and easy and I would say purposeful for the youth that's when they will get more engaged and more involved, right? And I think this is something that all of us, whether are we in the senior position, in leadership position, it's something that we should seriously consider to include more of them, right? In your activities, in your planning even. Yeah.
I do want to rephrase this question for Yalin. I know you wanted something to share. But, when we're going back to the idea of sustainable development, going back to also the idea of trusting young people to be a part of this. I mean, that trust comes from authorities, that trust comes from governments and decision makers. When we're talking about the need to trust young people, the need to involve the youth voice, how is that important in trying to achieve sustainable development in the future?
I think like a youth is kind of a backbone for tomorrow, or not that long time we're gonna be a main man of the all power. So I think when we make a youth to be a part of it, like when you really listen to a youth, and a youth feel like, I want to be a part of it, I see my future, I want my future to full of what we want. So we try to create it now. Like, we face global warming, we face a lot of things that we know that our earth is getting worse in every single day because of what we have done in every single day as well. But when you make the youth be a part of it and they realize, I want to live in a better life because I'm not dying tomorrow. I'm still want to have my wonderful life. That's why you want to be a part of a development, as a sustainable, and as you say, that is to be something fun. Yeah, it's to be something fun. Like sometimes when we talk about sustainable, it seems like, oh, it's far away from us. From some, you might think about it. Me in the past, I think what it is sustainable is looks so far away from us. Maybe when we are talking about this kind of thing or about a policy, it should be something that you feel like fun. Or I understand what it is, or I will do it. I want to be a part of it. And sometimes when we want to do something, like in the past, I try to say no to the stroll, and some of my friends, why do you have to say no to a stroll? We have to make this kind of thing to be like a normal, like we all did it, and it's normal, that's good for us, and make people around it. Maybe we have to start from ourselves. And yeah, like I just start from myself and my friend, they understand me, and just from just a little point, and is getting bigger and bigger, like a yes.
But perhaps for some young people, instead of waiting on other people to trust them to be a part of this, decision making, some young people have taken it, matters into their own hands and decided to just do their own thing. I mean, we were referring to Greta a while back, how she did her own thing, and now how she started this global movement, a sort of revolution of sorts. Arvin, when we're talking about collaborating across borders, apart from just relying on other people to trust us as young people, perhaps we need to take that first step, right, to cross borders and collaborate with each other. What do you think are some areas that could be potentially good for collaboration for young people in ASEAN, or what's lacking perhaps? What are some areas or sectors that would require and need some more collaboration in ASEAN?
Actually, Naila, if you look at the ASEAN specifically, I personally believe that we lack on sense of belonging towards ASEAN. You see, because I believe that we should have the sense of belonging first when we talk about togetherness. You see, when we share the cake, when we share the happiness, when we share the sadness, I believe that first of all, we should have the sense of belonging as the ASEAN. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, moving forward, I believe that we should have the social interaction. We should have enhanced the social relationship between the ASEAN young leaders, the young people, and the people generally around ASEAN. So I believe that at first place, we are lacking on the sense of belonging as a ASEAN. So I think that we should move more forward on how to create the sense of belonging as an ASEAN. You see, because ASEAN is a beautiful, a bind of beautiful countries where we have a different language, where we have a different culture, where we have a different kind of foods, and a lot of things. That's beautiful. And in terms of economy, we can see that ASEAN have a good developing countries. We can see developed countries and a lot of things. There's a lot of expertise and a lot of things that we can exchange. But before we work toward exchanging the expertise, when we work towards to share the cake, we should look into the sense of belonging, expect first, so that we can move forward as the greater ASEAN, I believe, Naila.
It's interesting that you pointed out the issue of identity. I mean, it's not, I think, just an issue of young people, but when we're talking about ASEAN politics, ASEAN member states, that's also the struggle that they have, the challenge that they face in trying to create that ASEAN identity. I mean, I think it's an ongoing process. But Ibnor, maybe you have some ideas to share regarding this when we're talking about, finding that sense of belonging and creating that ASEAN identity. Going back to a sustainable future, sustainable development, maybe that can be part of its foundation, right? In the fact that we're still in the process of trying to create that belonging, that identity. What do you think could be some themes, some ideas, some values and principles that could be at the very essence of the ASEAN sense of belonging and identity?
It's very interesting that you brought this up, and this is something which I also brought up to our national leaders. Strangely, when we were in China, right? Yeah. So Singapore at the government level and the national youth leaders, which I was part of the delegation, we went to China, and that's when we were in an existential maybe crisis, maybe mini crisis, right? Where in essence, right, China is also growing. China is looking at making new friends, and there were conversations that they want to be friends with ASEAN. So there's that context. And the other one is that Singapore for the longest while have been playing a role, kind of the connection between the East and the West, China and the US, right? And then we start to realize that, hey, you know what? Maybe recently when China is growing very fast, they don't really see a need for us. China can just go directly to US, right? Because now more and more of the Chinese nationals are better in communicating in English. Some of them are already living in the US, and that's when we start to ask ourselves, like then what is our value and what is our role, right? And then we start to realize that, hey, you know what? We have a wonderful neighborhood, right? The ASEAN neighborhood, right? And I think this is something which my late mentor, his name is Lai Hock. He is the founder for Ground Up Initiative, right? And before that, he was a regional director, And when his friend passed away in a plane crash, he entered also an existential question. If I were to die tomorrow, what would I regret? And at that point of time, he decided to go around the world living in villages. After he went living around villages, he realized that that's kind of the true meaning of sustainability and what it means to live more sustainably. And then when he came back to Singapore, he kind of like bring back the kampong culture. And I think there's something about the identity part. And I think I've been traveling around ASEAN, and I realized this kampong culture, this kampong spirit, this village spirit is a very ASEAN thing. Yeah. Right, and I think this is something that we can treasure, and there is this saying that Lai Hock shared with me, that we all need to build a sustainable future with a 21st century kampong culture, and I think this is something which is quite interesting. So when I go to Indonesia, I will spend time living in the villages. I mean, it's quite easy to go to live in the city and just spend your time there, but I enjoy making some effort, right, to live among the villages.
When we're talking about the identity, what ideas do you have, some values or principles that can tie together or be at the essence of the ASEAN identity for ASEAN youths?
For the ASEAN youth, I think we have, as a talent kid, I think we might have some, like in ASEAN, we have a good, what do we say, like culture as a show together. Like Vietnam have one thing, Thailand have one thing, and we might create something new for this as an ASEAN together. Like we put that out good of each country together as a show and let the world see like what we have as a youth effort. Because I think a show for the ASEAN, it could be something fun that people want to be a part of it. Or maybe we should have something like in Thailand, we try to have a lot of about the competitions that you're showing the good thing, a good size as a, what do we say? I'm sorry, I forgot the word in English. Performance. Yes, a performance from, each country together. I think the performance of each country is something that show how strong and the root of what we are, like who we are from a long time ago. And if we want to build something, I think we need something in connection together to see like, yeah, we are the team, like Aaron said at first, right? Like something we not that real much as a team, but I believe that in the future that we could make it as a team, strong team.
Yeah, and surely it's an ongoing process in trying to develop and create that identity and sense of belonging together. But hopefully what we're doing today in trying to network and create this discourse among each other is perhaps a good beginning. It's part of the process in discussing and creating more awareness, hopefully among youths across ASEAN in trying to create that identity towards a sustainable future together. Plenty more, of course, to unpack, but that's all the time that we have today. Thank you so much to all our panelists today, to Yalin, to Arvin, to Idnor and Jay, for joining us on Dialog Anak Muda to discuss about the sustainable future that ASEAN youth want and hope to see in this region. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. Terima kasih sudi menonton Dialog Anak Muda jam ini bersama saya, Naila Huda. Salam hormat.